Highlights of this week are, or lowlights, are the International Court of Justice, which is an outlet of the United Nations. I'm not saying that as an insult, though it actually is an insult, but it's an outlet of the United Nations called, it could just as well be called, really, the United Nations Court. They call it the International Court of Justice. It sounds better. One of the things that we know is that, and it's a hard thing to face in a way, but it is what it is, and it makes sense, is that justice has a lot of injustice in many cases. First of all, the judges are human beings, and they all come with predispositions, predilections, to put it nicely. And that's the way it is. Even based in a Jewish court of law, which will be made up of 3 rabbis, ideally, but it could be made up of any 3 Shomer Shabbat Jews, men. But sometimes you get what's called Zabla Zabla. Zeborer lo echad, zebocher lo echad. Where instead of a sitting bet din of 3 rabbis, the halacha is that one of the 2 parties may pick his rabbi or Shomer Shabbat representative, ideally a rabbi who has good knowledge of law, and the other one picks his rabbi, and then those 2 rabbis pick the 3rd one. See the problem? It's acknowledged that it's that. How do you get pure justice? In order to get pure justice, even like that, you end up, why don't we just pick 3 rabbis? Because there's always concern, human beings. And so presumably if the 2 rabbis pick a 3rd rabbi, acceptable to both sides, it's your best possible chance at justice. I was just reading a book. I recommend it. It's not badly written. It's pretty decently written, but it doesn't have zip and presume to it. But I just read a book, The Fraud of the Century. It really brings it home. The 1876 presidential election, Rutherford B. Hayes versus Samuel Tilden. It's the most corrupt. If you think Trump elections or Bush v. Gore it's unbelievable that the country continued after that election. Certainly it's unbelievable that democracy continued. It really is the ultimate testimony to the problems of democracy. In that election, to be brief, because that's not what you're here for, but you are, because International Court of Justice. We were just coming out of the Civil War, the era of Reconstruction. And the southern states, the losing side, the Dixie side, there was still a lot of hatred for blacks and racism, but I mean really intense. And now blacks were free and they could fight back. And don't mix them up with like inner city blacks of today. They were good people who were not looking for fighting, but they got rifles and guns to fight back. Those were the times of the Ku Klux Klan. They had to fight or they'd be hanged. And states of specifically Louisiana, Florida, stuff was going on in those 2 states, and South Carolina, unbelievable stuff. And now the election came. And boy, was that some election. You think there were issues over machines? How about prejudiced people on both sides counting paper ballots? Wow. And there was a complete fight over which side won in Louisiana, which side won in Florida, and which side won in South Carolina. In all 3 cases, they had Ulysses Grant, the president, he had to send the National Guard, and in fact, the Army, to those 3 places, because they started having Ku Klux Klan hangings, and the blacks were fighting back, rightly so. And amid the election, you think there was an unfair election in 2020, or Bush v. Gore with the Chads getting punched out. And then what ended up happening is when it came time to count the electoral votes, Each of those three states had two different versions. According to the law, the governor of the state has to sign the sheet of the Electoral College report to the Congress. So what happened was in each state, the governor signed, and then the guy from the other party who claimed to have just won the November gubernatorial election, signed his own electoral college. See, I had two different reports from each of those states. And then in Oregon, which was entitled to 3 electors, one of them was disputed because he held a position that technically invalidated him. And then the question became, if he's invalidated, who gets his vote? And this guy who came in next on the list was the other party. And they were fighting and fighting and fighting. And the president in those days took office March 4. And no one ever expected it would come to that, but they had until March 3 to finally decide. And every day till March 3, the fight went on. Now, the popular vote was no problem. Samuel Tilden won the popular vote by 200,000 votes. It wasn't close. But the electoral votes is what counts. And the very end, they couldn't, they're getting into February, they can't decide. And you'd say, well, let the Senate and the House decide. So the House was Democrat and the Senate was Republican. So they couldn't form a committee of the two. So they tried to form a committee, they couldn't. So finally they formed a committee of 15, 7 Democrats from the House and 8 senators from Republicans, to form a committee, an electoral college committee that would decide what's the deal with Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina. And in order to avoid a tie, they had 15. And there were 7 Republican judges and 7 Democrat judges and politicians on each side. And then who was the 15th? They picked a guy who was a Supreme Court justice and was regarded as the most neutral of all. And it's a long story, but he got the note from his state Senate. The state had just elected him. In those days, people did not vote for senators. The state government picked their 2 senators. And the last minute, that guy got picked to be a senator. And the belief is he was picked to be a senator because he had slight inclinations towards the Democrats. So the Republicans may help get him to be a senator to get him off the committee, because he couldn't be on the committee if he's a senator. And then the 15th guy was a Republican. And then they fought and they fought. And the speeches and congressmen actually came. It got so bad, they came to Congress with pistols. And there were several times they shot in the air in the House of Congress, pointed pistols at each other. I mean, you want to talk about the 2020 election. And finally, Rutherford B. Hayes got that vote. They voted 8-7 according to party lines. They gave him Louisiana, they gave him Florida, gave him South Carolina, they gave him the guy in Oregon, and he ended up winning the election. Again, Tilden won by 200,000 votes, and Hayes won 185 to 184. I mention all of this to underscore what we all know. Courts are only just so honest. They are most honest when they're dealing with a contract dispute, a property dispute, maybe a tort, somebody hit me, and they get, what happened here? Maybe libel, defamation, and certain administrative law issues. When you start getting into politics, courts are utterly, we've lived through it time and time again. You can't count on it. If you expect Kagan and Sotomayor and the one who cannot define a woman, if you expect them not to come out on one side, and if you expect Alito and Thomas and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Barrett not to come out most of the time on the other side, the only one who is a little bit unpredictable is Roberts. he would come out Republican, but he's got this thing in his head that he has to prove that judges are not, there's no Obama judges or Clinton judges. So sometimes he comes out the other way just to show you could never guess because the court is impartial, but it's not. They try to be. Some of them do. Most of them, and even the ones that do, they analyze the law from an honest perspective that governs where they're coming from. End of this. International Court of Justice. At the very, very best, when the Arabs bring a case against Israel before the International Court of Justice, at the very, very best, they're going to look at international law and they're going to balance all sides and they're going to come up with some kind of a ruling. That's at the best. But international law, it's already prejudiced against Israel. The United Nations always votes against Israel. They always do. And other than America, no one, even Israel's friends, United Kingdom, nobody ever vetoes an anti-Israel resolution. Anytime they issue a statement against Arab terror, they say we call on both sides to lower the heat, just like in American politics. When there's some kind of an anti-Semitism, Ilhan Omar was anti-Semitic and said horrible stuff. Now we take it for granted. And Rashida Tlaib, and people were shocked initially, no longer. And there was a movement to issue a formal statement by the House or the Senate. So Nancy Pelosi helped draft it. And basically, we oppose anti-Semitism and we oppose Islamophobia. They always balance the two, as if there's any comparison. And the nature of Islam, I mean, believe me, the media, anytime an Arab would face racism, you'll hear about it all over the media. You don't hear about it. But you hear about it with the other, with anti-Semitism. So the International Court of Justice, which did not even have a right to consider the case because it was brought by the PLO, the so-called Palestinian Authority, which is not supposed to do that. And under international law, they have a contract called the 1993 Oslo Accords, which a lot of us Jews don't like. That's Rabin's deal, which gave Arafat a country, not exactly a country, the Palestine Authority. But part of the 1993 Oslo Agreement is that the PA, the Palestine Authority, is not allowed to bring litigation against Israel in international courts. So they breached the contract. It's a material breach. You can be sure you'll be hearing a lot of voices from the Israeli right saying now it's time to nullify from Israel's side the Oslo Agreement, which we have wanted to nullify for the last 30 years. Now we have an opening because they materially breached. So the International Court of Justice had no right to even consider. They should have thrown it back. They ended up taking on the case, and they issued a decision on Friday, Erev Shabbos, Erev Shabbat. It is illegal for Israel to be anywhere in the so-called West Bank, Judea and Samaria. It's complete occupation, and by order of the court, Israel must give it all back, like a fight over a piece of property. By order of the court, you have to give back the property to the other side. Baruch Hashem, the International Court of Justice, their rulings have no enforcement authority, just like all the UN resolutions. They only have persuasive authority. It can empower anti-Semites and anti-Semitic countries to say we're against this or that, and we're in line with international law of the International Court. Not only all of Judea and Samaria, but Israel has to get out of East Jerusalem. Israel has no right to East Jerusalem. They have to get out of East Jerusalem. And Israel has to get out of Gaza. And not only all that, but finally, Israel has to pay reparations, like Germany after World War I. Israel has to pay reparations for 50 years, 60 years of occupation. Now, different people are going to respond in different ways. Our class, which is a class, I'm not going on like a rant, or it's a regular class of ours, but I'm overviewing the two main issues of the week. So that's one issue. And in Israel, they will have all their lawyers preparing all their legal briefs, arguing why international law supports Israel. And good, fine, if that's if that keeps them happy, and it's appropriate to create such a document for future use if there's ever a time that. But I think the proper response, given the realities of the world in which we live in the year 2024, 5784, is number one, to ignore it. I mean, first, criticize it and condemn it and blast it. Number two, ignore it. And really, it's just as well that I'm not the prime minister, because I would declare 1993 Oslo null and void, and therefore I would declare sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. And go ahead, let's turn that into an 1876 presidential election now. Go ahead and work it out, because we have a tie. You've got a ruling, and we're here, and we have Judea and Samaria. And you could ask our lawyers; they're preparing a beautiful brief that defends it. And if you don't recognize it, tough luck. For 3,000 years, the world has not recognized it. Torah says in chapter 23, Perachaf Gimel of Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, Pasuk Tes, verse 9, Hein am levadad yishkon. Bil'am the prophet prophesied at the request of Balak, the king of Moab, to put a curse on the Jews. And he tried 3 times, and he articulated what he believed would be a curse, and God put the words in his mouth that were blessings. And one of those blessings was, behold, this is a nation that stands alone. Ein am levadad yishkon. Now you would think that's a curse. What country, what people wants to have set upon them, have a whammy put on them, behold, it's a people that dwells alone. But Balak, the king of Moab, knew that was a blessing. Bilam apologized that a blessing came out of his mouth, and we understand that as a blessing. It is a blessing for the Jews to stand alone. It's good to have allies. We love to have allies. It's a blessing to stand alone, to have our own beliefs and our own compass, our own moral compass. And the world cannot, because of their ways, we will not deviate to follow their ways, not only in politics, but morality and other things like that. We're a nation that stands alone. The other issue of the day, and then we get going, we have gotten going, is that the Houthis of Yemen, it is so frustrating to me, not only as a Jew, but as an American. The Houthis are nothing. They're in Yemen, which is nothing. The Houthis could be, I would say we could bomb them into the Middle Ages, but they presently are in the Middle Ages. We can bomb them to Kingdom Come, or can bomb them to the Stone Age. They wouldn't know what hit them. And visitors to Yemen, if there ever were any visitors to Yemen, wouldn't know the difference. How it can be that this ragtag, I hate to call them an army, this ragtag bunch of schleppers who got some weapons and some drones from Iran, how they can be shooting British, French, American ships, commercial ships in the Red Sea, causing absolute chaos and a cost of tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, and not have been wiped out, reflects the corruption, the moral decay and rot of Western society under the Geneva Accords, which completely have screwed up right and wrong. The Geneva Accords are like 1949, after World War II. It should never happen again. And the bad guys violate the Geneva Accords, and the good guys follow it. And that's why we can't win a war. America cannot win a war anymore. America won World War II. The Allies won World War I. Then came the Geneva Accords. We couldn't win in Korea. We couldn't win in Vietnam. We can't win anywhere. Even though we have all these weapons, we can't win. So now you have the Houthis, and they shoot $30 drones. I'm serious. They shoot $30 drones, and we spend, America spends multi-million-dollar rockets to knock down those drones before they cause damage. So we're spending hundreds of million dollars using up our military materiel, and they spend like $500, $5,000. And every so often they send one at Israel. And they always get knocked down. They're drones. They're like things you could buy at Target or at Walmart. And Israel spends these $1 million air Iron Dome rockets to shoot down these 30. It's insane. And it's costing a fortune. Finally, on Friday, a drone got through. And they say Israel's already announced it was human error. That drone never should have gotten through. They saw it. Someone missed the signal, and the drone got through, dropped the thing in Tel Aviv, the heart of Tel Aviv, a block from the United States consulate, and killed a person and wounded 10. In the heart of Tel Aviv, that's the heart of Israel. And Israel hit back hard. But again, those are the two stories of the week, and we'll be going from there. Thank you all very much for being here. And this was to give you the background of what we're going to be covering now. But it's a good week. We're all alive. Like when people say to me, Rabbi, I feel so bad for you with the lung transplant and some, what are you talking about? I have a class. I'm doing great. When I came out of surgery, I couldn't even talk. They did something to my vocal cords. They paralyzed it. Now I can talk. My main problem is I should not talk too long. I'm well, and after class today, I have to be on the other side of Southern California to conduct an unveiling as a rabbi. And I mean, thank God, I'm writing articles. I'm watching TV shows that are funny. Ellen and I suddenly got into this new show last few weeks, whenever we can find a half an hour. It's one of the funniest shows on TV. If you don't want to see dirty, filthy schmutz and want to have a good laugh, I Love Lucy. Go figure. Big, sophisticated guy like me with a Columbia University ground and an UCLA law graduate. Nothing as funny as I Love Lucy. It's as funny today. I hadn't seen it for 20 years. They're funny. And they're clean. Okay, here we go. Again, thank you so much for being with us. First, I have to hide that, and then I have to optimize. Okay, and that sometimes causes those black boxes. Here we go.
International law. Having examined Israel's policies and practices.
Okay. Try it again.
The court reaffirms, as it did in its whole advisory opinion, that the Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the regime associated with them have been established and are being maintained in violation of international law. Having examined Israel's policies and practices, both in relation to East Jerusalem and to the West Bank, with a view to determining whether they amount to annexation, the court comes to the conclusion that Israel's policies and practices, including the maintenance and expansion of settlements, the construction of associated infrastructure and the wall, the exploitation of natural resources, the proclamation of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the comprehensive application of Israeli domestic law in East Jerusalem, and its extensive application in the West Bank, entrench Israel's control of the occupied Palestinian territory, notably of East Jerusalem and of Area C of the West Bank. These policies and practices are designed to maintain in place indefinitely, to remain in place indefinitely and to create irreversible effects on the ground. Consequently, the court considered that these policies and practices amount to annexation of large parts of the occupied Palestinian territory.
Well, if it's annexation, so call it annexation. Israel should do that.
Welcome back to BBC News. Well, in the last few minutes, the UN's top court, the International Court of Justice, has delivered an advisory opinion outlining that Israel's settlement of Palestinian territories are in breach of international law. Now, it had been examining the issue since the beginning of last year. I think we can take a quick listen now to that opinion being given live.
All right, that we heard.
The court considers it important
into this. And Frank, just explain to viewers at home what exactly the court has been looking into, because important to underline that this has been going on since before the October 7th attacks by Hamas and the start of the Gaza War.
That's right. So this is the International Court of Justice, not the International Criminal Court. It's issuing an advisory. It's not legally binding, but it will be seen as a basis for international law, and it's examining the legality of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory since 1967, particularly focusing on the West Bank and East Jerusalem and settlements therein. And it's a pretty damning verdict on Israel's actions and policies there. I'm just going to, because this is incredibly legalese, and as you can imagine, there was a big preamble as to what the framework of their work has been. This is delivered by the spokesperson for 15 judges. They've been examining this since 2022. They took evidence throughout February from around 50 countries. And their conclusions in brief are that Israel's policies and practices are in breach of international law. The continued presence of Israel in the occupied territories is illegal. And they call on Israel to cease all new settlement activity. It particularly focuses on the settlements and the treatment of Palestinians in those territories. Now, Israel, I think, they're unlikely to accept this. In the past, that they have not accepted the legality of rulings when it comes to their occupation of Palestinian territories. But I think it's a pretty hostile verdict for Israel, this.
OK, Frank, well, we have to leave it there, I'm afraid. But Frank Gardner, thanks for that.
Extended to 6:30 and other times adjusted accordingly.
Senator James Inhofe just died 2 weeks ago of blessed memory. He was a Republican of Oklahoma. He's a terrible speaker. He stammers even when he's got a written speech in front of him. Just passed away 2 weeks ago. And I want to share with you 7 minutes of this speech, partly to remember him, partly because it couldn't be more timely. He offers 7 reasons that the land belongs to Israel. And I'm skipping 19 minutes. I'm only going to play 7 minutes. First, he's a little bit difficult to listen to for too long because of his stammering. God bless his soul. And I want to get these 7 minutes in. He has first told you 2 reasons of the 7, namely archaeological findings show that the Jews are indigenous, and history. The Jews left only because they were expelled by the Romans, and he goes through the archaeology and the history for 20 minutes. Again, I'd play it, but we're time constrained, and you'll see he's not the best speaker. But the next 7 minutes, he goes through reasons 3 to 7. Again, the first 2 reasons, that the land should be Israel, not the Arabs, archaeology and history.
The Turks. So historically, the land was given to the Israelis in 1917, and then, of course, we know that Israel gained its independence in 1948. Now, so we have the archaeological reasons. We have 7 reasons: archaeological reason, the historical reason. But here's the third reason. The third reason I believe it belongs to Israel is because of the practical value of the Israelis being there. Israel today is a modern marvel of agriculture. Israel is able to bring more food out of the desert environment than any other country in the world. The Arab nations ought to make Israel their friend and import technology from Israel that would allow all of the Middle East, not just Israel, to be exporters of food. Right now, it's only Israel. So Israel, unarguably, has the success in its agriculture. They have been able to develop it when nobody else has. The fourth reason, I believe that Israel has the right to the land, is on the ground of humanitarianism. You see, there are 6 million Jews slaughtered in Europe in World War II. The persecution against the Jews was very strong in Russia since the advent of communism. Persecution was against the Jews even before that time under the Tsars. These people have the right to their homeland. If we are not going to allow them a homeland in the Middle East, then where? What other nation on earth is going to cede territory? They are not asking for a great deal. You know, the whole nation of Israel fits into my state of Oklahoma 7 times. So on humanitarian grounds alone, Israel ought to have the land. The fifth reason that I disagree with President Obama and think that Israel should have the right to the land without any changes, not going back to 1967, is because it is a strategic ally to the United States. Now, whether we realize it or not, Israel is a detriment and an impediment to certain groups hostile to democracies and hostile to those things that we believe in, hostile to the very things that make us the greatest nation in the history of the world. Israel has kept them from taking complete control of the Middle East. If it were not for Israel, they would overrun the region. Israel is our only strategic ally. And Mr. President, it's good to know that we have a friend in the Middle East that we can count on. They vote with us in the United Nations more than England, more than Germany, more than Canada, more than France, more than any other country in the world. And so they have been our consistent ally for strategic reasons. The sixth reason that Israel should be entitled to the land is that Israel is a roadblock to terrorism. The war we are now facing is not a war against a sovereign nation. It is a fluid group of terrorists moving from one country to another. They are almost invisible. That is who we are fighting against. We need every ally we can get. If we do not stop terrorism in the Middle East, it will be on our shores. Now, I've said this and said this and said this. One of the reasons I believe the spiritual door was open for an attack against the United States is because of the policy of our government has been to ask the Israelis to demand with pressure that they not retaliate against the terrorist attacks that have been launched against them. Now, since its independence in 1948, Israel has fought 4 wars. In all these wars, they were not the aggressor. They weren't the aggressor in any of the wars. Some people might argue that with Egypt that they were the first ones there. No, Egypt was building up, and everybody knew what was going to happen. You have to understand that in all 4 cases, Israel was attacked. Well, in Israel won all 4 wars against impossible odds. They are great warriors. I've spent some time over there. They consider a level playing field to be outnumbered 2-1, and they're great people. There are 39 Scud missiles that landed on Israel's soil during the Gulf War. Our president asked Israel at that time, remember our policy was to try to get them not to respond. We asked them at that time not to respond. In order to have the Arab nations on board, we asked Israel not even to participate in the war. They showed incredible restraint. They did not. And we asked them to stand back and not do anything over these attacks. We have criticized them. They have been criticized in our media. Our local people in television and radio offer criticism of Israel, not knowing the true issues. We need to be informed. Years ago, I was so thrilled when I heard a reporter posed a question to our former Secretary of State, Colin Powell, during the Gulf War. He said, Mr. Powell, the United States has advocated a policy of restraint in the Middle East. We have discouraged Israel from retaliation again and again and again because we have said that it leads to continued escalation, that it escalates the violence. He said, are we going to follow, we, the United States, going to follow that preaching ourselves? Mr. Powell indicated that we would strike back. In other words, we can tell Israel not to do it, but when it hits us, we're going to do it. And that's one of the reasons that I believe the door was open, because we held back our tiny little friend. We have not allowed them to go to the heart of the problem. This was a mistake. Terrorism is not going to go away. If Israel were driven into the sea tomorrow, and every Jew in the Middle East were killed, terrorism would not end. You know that in your heart, terrorism would continue. It's not just a matter of Israel and the Middle East, it's the heart of the very people who are perpetrating this stuff. You know, should they be successful in overrunning Israel? They won't be, but should they be, it would not be enough. They will never be satisfied. And we learned that in Camp David. Now, the 7th reason, and this is going to upset a lot of people, but I've got to say it because it's obvious and it's printed right up there on the desk. I believe very strongly the 7th reason that we ought to support Israel is that it has a right to the land. This is the most important reason. Are you ready for this? Because God said so. As I said a minute ago, look it up in the book of Genesis. Genesis 13, verse 14, 15, and 17. The Bible says, the Lord, this is very specific too. This is very interesting. A lot of people forget this. The Lord said to Abram, Lift up now your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, westward, for all the land which you see, to you will I give it, and to your seed forever. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it to thee. That's God talking. He's talking about Israel. The Bible says that Abraham moved his tent and came to dwell in the plain of Mamre, which is in what we call the Hebron, and built there an altar before the Lord. Hebron is in the West Bank. It's the West Bank. Right here is what we're talking about. Is the place where God appeared to Abraham and said, I am giving you this land, the West Bank. Now, I can hear everyone yelling and screaming now about this because you're quoting the Bible, but that's their problem, not mine. This is not a political battle at all. It's a contest over whether or not the Word of God is true. The 7 reasons here, I'm convinced, clearly establish that Israel has a right to the land. Years ago on the lawn of the White House, Yitzhak Rabin shook hands with PLO chairman Yasser Arafat. It was a historic occasion. It was a tragic occasion. At the time, the official policy of the government of Israel began to be, quote, let us appease the terrorists, let us begin to trade the land for peace. They tried. This process continued unabated here in our own nation, in Camp David, in the summer of 2000. I remember it so well when Prime Minister Ehud Barak offered the most generous concessions to Yasser Arafat that had ever been on the table. He offered him more than 90%, listen to this, more than 90% of all of the West Bank territory, sovereign control of it. There were some parts he did not want to offer, but in exchange for that, he said he would give up land in Israel proper that the PLO was not even asking for. And he also did the unthinkable. That we can't imagine today. He even talked about dividing Jerusalem and allowing the Palestinians to have their capital there in the east. Yasser Arafat stormed out of the meeting. Now, why did he storm out of the meeting? Why would he storm out? Everything he asked for was offered to him. Everything. A couple of months later, when there began to be riots and terrorism, the riots began when Ariel Sharon went to the Temple Mount. We all remember this. And this was used as the thing that lit the fire that caused the explosion. This is the excuse they used. Now, I'm talking about the terrorists. Did you know that Sharon did not go to the Temple Mount unannounced? He contacted the Islamic authorities before he went. He secured their permission. He had permission to be there. It was no surprise. The response was very carefully calculated. They knew they would not pay attention to the details. And so they would portray this as an Arab world, in the Arab world, as an attack on the Holy Mosque. They would. I would like to cover one last thing because.
Turning now to Israel.
We saw this last week in the context of right after the assassination attempt on President Trump. We were reminding ourselves of Trump's record on Israel, and this is the Secretary of State. But I'm popping it in real quick now because I had not expected, but with the International Court of Justice saying that Israel being in Judea and Samaria is illegal, this context reminds us that under the previous American administration, the formal position of the United States is that it is legal.
The Trump administration is reversing the Obama administration's approach towards Israeli settlements. U.S. public statements on settlement activities in the West Bank have been inconsistent over decades. In 1978, the Carter administration categorically concluded that Israel's establishment of civilian settlements was inconsistent with international law. However, in 1981, President Reagan disagreed with that conclusion and stated that he didn't believe that the settlements were inherently illegal. Subsequent administrations recognized that unrestrained settlement activity could be an obstacle to peace, but they wisely and prudently recognized that dwelling on legal positions didn't advance peace. However, in December 2016, at the very end of the previous administration, Secretary Kerry changed decades of this careful bipartisan approach by publicly reaffirming the supposed illegality of settlements. After carefully studying all sides of the legal debate, this administration agrees with President Reagan. The establishment of Israeli civilian settlements in the West Bank is not per se inconsistent with international law. I want to emphasize several important considerations. First, look, we recognize that as Israeli courts have, that legal conclusions relating to individual settlements must depend on an assessment of specific facts and circumstances on the ground. Therefore, the United States government is expressing no view on the legal status of any individual settlement. The Israeli legal system affords an opportunity to challenge settlement activity and assess humanitarian considerations connected to it. Israeli courts have confirmed the legality of certain settlement activities and has concluded that others cannot be legally sustained. Second, we're not addressing or prejudging the ultimate status of the West Bank. This is for the Israelis and the Palestinians to negotiate. International law does not compel a particular outcome nor create any legal obstacle to a negotiated resolution. Third, the conclusion that we will no longer recognize Israeli settlements as per se inconsistent with international law is based on the unique facts, history, and circumstances presented by the establishment of civilian settlements in the West Bank. Our decision today does not prejudice or decide legal conclusions regarding situations in any other parts of the world. And finally, calling the establishment of civilian settlements inconsistent with international law hasn't worked. It hasn't advanced the cause of peace. The hard truth is there will never be a judicial resolution to the conflict, and arguments about who is right and wrong as a matter of international law will not bring peace. This is a complex political problem that can only be solved by negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians alike.
While I was looking up Pompeo, I found this 10-second dancing with soldiers of the IDF. I miss him. He's much better than Blinken as a Secretary of State. Amid all of this discussion, I wanted to play Hatikva.
Israel A deadly drone strike early today in Tel Aviv, just a block from the U.S. consulate. No Americans were hurt, but at least one person was killed. Iranian-backed Houthi militants in Yemen are claiming responsibility. CBS's Deborah Patta is in Jerusalem tonight.
This is the weaponized Iranian-made drone that Houthis say they fired from Yemen, caught on camera as it pierced through Israel's air defense system and exploded in central Tel Aviv.
Behind me, you can see the American flag flying above the U.S. consulate just a few steps away from where the blast occurred.
Eyewitness Yael Giselle Shani was still awake after a night out.
A flash of red, yellow, orange. It was massive, and everything was just shaking.
Fireball.
Her friend Jonathan Cotton was quick to react.
And then I felt this heat on the back of my face. I quickly grabbed my friends, brought them to the grounds, and then rushed them into the bomb shelter in the back. I got my helmets, my gun, my vest. I'd assumed that this was October 7th all over again.
Shrapnel killed one man and injured at least 10 people. Israel had been tracking the unmanned aircraft but lost it as it came in from the sea. The drone then failed to trigger warning sirens, which Israeli authorities have admitted was due to human error.
Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu will visit the U.S. next week to address Congress. Ahead of the Secretary of State Antony Blinken said although some issues still need to be resolved, the long-sought ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel was within sight. Maurice?
Deborah Patta tonight in Israel. Thank you.
In the area of the port, the Israeli Air Force struck dual-use infrastructure used for terrorist activities, including energy infrastructures.
Hagari is announcing that Israel then struck back yesterday and wiped out like a $30 million gas and oil infrastructure in Yemen.
Israel's necessary and proportionate strikes were carried out in order to stop the Houthi terror attacks. However, this threat goes far beyond Israel. The Houthis target other countries in the Middle East, the United States of America, and the world with their attacks on international shipping in the Red Sea, and not just the Red Sea. Who is behind the Houthis? One country, Iran. The Iranian regime funds, arms, and directs the Houthi terror activity. Israel is fighting a multi-front war against Iran's aggression proxies, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iranian militias in Syria and Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. The International Maritime Coalition, led by United States Central Command, as well as the IDF, have stopped many of those Houthis' attacks in recent months. We see common interests for all countries attacked by Iranian-backed Houthi terrorism to stand together against this threat. Today, this was an IDF-only action. I want to repeat it. Today, this was an IDF-only action. We will continue to defend the people of Israel from all threats, near and far. Questions, please. Thank you.
من أجل غزة لهم سر ما
יצאתי כעת מבור חיל האוויר, בו שהייתי ביחד עם ראש הממשלה, עם הרמטכ"ל ועם מפקד חיל האוויר במעקב אחרי התקיפה של מטוסי חיל האוויר בנמל חודיידה, 2,000 קילומטר ממדינת ישראל. את האש שבוערת עכשיו בחודיידה רואים בכל רחבי המזרח התיכון, ולעניין הזה יש משמעויות ברורות. החות'ים תקפו אותנו למעלה מ-200 פעם. בפעם הראשונה שבה הם פגעו באזרח ישראלי, הכינו אותם, ואנחנו נעשה את זה בכל מקום שבו הדבר הזה יידרש. לדם שלאזרחים ישראלים יש מחיר, הוא לא הפקר. את זה יודעים היום, גם בלבנון, גם בעזה, גם בתימן וגם במקומות אחרים. אם יעיזו לתקוף אותנו, התוצאה תהיה זהה.
From the beginning of the war, I made it clear that Israel will act against all those who attack us. This is why earlier today, I asked the Israeli cabinet to back my decision to strike against the Houthi targets in Yemen. The port that was targeted is not an innocent port. It's used as the entry point for weapons that are supplied by Iran to its Houthi terrorist proxies. The Houthis have used those weapons to attack Israel, to attack Arab states in the region, to attack many others. This strike comes in direct response to the killer drone attack yesterday that killed one person and injured several others 100 yards from the US consulate in Tel Aviv. But the aggression of the Houthis goes well beyond that single attack. Because for the past 8 months, the Houthis have launched hundreds of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones against Israel. The only reason those attacks have not caused a greater loss of life has been the defensive measures taken by Israel and its allies, which together have intercepted hundreds of projectiles. I would like to thank the United States, Britain, France, and other members of the International Maritime Coalition that was formed to repel Houthi attacks. But the drone attack that struck Israel in the early morning hours yesterday shows that more than defensive action is needed to curtail the Houthis. Offensive action is also needed. It's needed to ensure that Iran's terror proxies pay a price for their brazen aggression. For over half a year, the Houthis have not only attacked Israel, they've also targeted the ships of dozens of countries traversing the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. This is a maritime corridor through which some 30% of the world's maritime commerce flows. The international community must redouble its efforts to protect this vital waterway and to hold both the Houthis and their Iranian sponsors accountable for their aggression. Today, Israel is being attacked by Iran and its proxies on 7 fronts. The Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shiite militias in Iraq and in Syria, Iran-backed terror attacks in Judea and Samaria, and of course, attacks directly conducted by Iran itself, as the world saw on April 14th. In defending ourselves against this Iranian terror axis, Israel stands on the front lines against a regime that threatens the entire Middle East, it threatens the entire world. This is why all those who seek a more secure and stable Middle East should fully support Israel's action against this terror axis in Yemen, in Gaza, in Lebanon, and elsewhere. And to Israel's enemies, I have a simple message. Do not doubt Israel's determination to defend itself on every front. All those who seek to harm us will pay a very heavy price for their aggression.
בקרוב תזרח השמש, נדע ימים יפים מאלה, הלב נלחם בדאגות. כולם יחזרו הביתה, נחכה להם למטה, הלוואי נדע בשורות טובות. כי עם הנצח לעולם לא מפחד, אפילו כשקשה לראות. כולם ביחד, אף אחד פה לא בודד, שישרפו המלחמות. עם ישראל חי, אם לא נשכח תמיד להיות מאוחדים. עם ישראל חי, בעליות בירידות גם בשעות הכי קשות. הקדוש ברוך הוא שומר עלינו, אז מי יכול עלינו? כי אין לנו עוד מדינה. תעשה שלום בינינו, שמור על ילדינו, כי לא עבדה האמונה. עם ישראל, עם ישראל חי. עם ישראל חי. אור ארצי נחלתנו, לא תיפול כעת רוחנו, מסביב ברזל של חרבות. ויונה תפרוס כנפיים, התקווה בת שנות 2000, עוד נצא לשיר ברחובות. כי עם הנצח לעולם לא מפחד, אפילו כשקשה לראות. כולם ביחד, אף אחד פה לא בודד, שישרפו המלחמות. עם ישראל חי, אם לא נשכח תמיד להיות מאוחדים. עם ישראל חי, בעליות בירידות גם בשעות הכי קשות. הקדוש ברוך הוא שומר עלינו, אז מי יכול עלינו? כי אין לנו עוד מדינה. תעשה שלום בינינו, שמור על ילדינו, כי לא עבדה האמונה. הקדוש ברוך הוא שומר עלינו, אז מי יכול עלינו? כי אין לנו עוד מדינה. תעשה שלום בינינו, שמור על ילדינו, כי לא עבדה האמונה. עם ישראל, עם ישראל חי. כי עם ישראל חי.
Tristan, thank you. Students at the University of Florida could be facing suspension or being banned from campus altogether because of recent Palestinian protests. According to the Gainesville Sun, there were 9 protesters detained on campus. The University of Florida sent a statement saying protesters were told they were allowed to practice free speech, free assembly, of course, First Amendment rights, but certain activities were banned. That included sound amplifiers like blowhorns, littering, creating structures, and other things as well on campus. Individuals who refused to comply were arrested. The university also says, quote, it is not a daycare and does not treat protesters like children, end quote, going on to say the students knew the rules, broke the rules, and will now face the consequences.
9 protesters who were arrested at the University of Florida in April are now calling for prosecutors to drop the charges.
6 of them are students, and they say they're also facing suspensions from the university, which they're appealing. TV20's Hawa Ezel spoke to one student protester and tells us how the group is branding itself.
UF9, that's what they're calling themselves. And one of them tells me the name was born in the holding cells of the Alachua County Jail when they were arrested.
It would functionally mean having to put our educations on pause for 3 years, which is why we feel like this is a de facto expulsion.
5 students faced 3 years suspension and were charged with misdemeanors.
I am worried about the kind of precedent it sets to see a peaceful protest turned into 9 people getting arrested.
One student faces 4 years suspension and a felony. 2 of the other protesters were Alachua County residents, and another was a Santa Fe student who's also facing academic repercussions. In April, UF released this statement listing what actions are strictly prohibited at on-campus protests. The University of Florida released this new statement saying they were clear about the consequences to come if arrested at a protest.
Before this, I had understood UF to be somewhat of a bastion of constitutional rights, especially the First Amendment.
Siegel says she wants the charges dropped and her suspension reduced.
Essentially means that if we want to finish undergrad before 2029, then we have to do that at another institution, which I really don't want. I was proud to go to UF. I want to continue my education there.
All 6 students have submitted appeals and are still awaiting a final decision. Reporting in Gainesville, Hawa Ezel, TV 20 News.
Tonight, St. Louis Jewish.
9 protesters who were arrested at the University of Florida in April
This
are
is
now
the
calling for
impact.
Tonight, St. Louis Jewish leaders.
Okay. This is the impact of Ron DeSantis as governor of Florida. That's all it takes, one strong governor. And then he appointed people like Ben Sasse, the former United States Senator, to be president of University of Florida. Unfortunately, Ben Sasse just had to step down this past week because his wife has certain severe health issues, including epilepsy. But Ben Sasse, and that's all it takes is a strong college dean, president, throw these kids out, and then let them whine. Well, welcome to growing up and becoming an adult, and let them deal with it. Now, this is big. August 6th, 2 weeks from now, they're having primaries. The 2 parties are having primaries in St. Louis. And the Democrat primary, Cori Bush, a humongous anti-Semite, even liberal Jews in St. Louis regard her as a major anti-Semite. The Jewish Federation, every Jewish group in St. Louis, they're all dedicated, if at all humanly possible, to voting her out. There's a very, very strong opponent, also a black guy. He's a DA. He seems to be somewhat popular. She was, in January, Cori Bush was ahead of him in polling by 17 points. A month ago, she was even, had lost a 17-point lead. There was 1 point that came out recently showing her behind by a substantial amount. Just as the Jewish community in AIPAC poured a tremendous amount of money into getting rid of Jamal Bowman, whom we've been covering the last few weeks in our Sunday classes, Cori Bush is next, God willing.
Are urging Congresswoman Cori Bush to apologize to their community. They believe her statements on Israel and Gaza are incorrect and accuse her of, quote, fanning the flames of anti-Semitism. Our Justina Coronel joins us in studio with reaction from the Jewish Federation of St. Louis and Cori Bush's response. Justina.
Yeah, and so the organization tells me more than 50 people signed and released a letter today condemning Cori Bush's words on social media. They said some of her statements failed to advance peace. However, the Congresswoman responded to the letter denying the claims. Signs of solidarity sway at the Jewish community campus. Ribbons represent their support for a safe return of hostages taken by Hamas terrorists.
We all wear them. We have them on the trees around our campus.
Beyond the blue bows, St. Louis Jewish organizations are making their stance known. More than 50 Jewish community members signed this letter released to St. Louisans on Wednesday, urging Congresswoman Cori Bush to apologize for her statements on Israel and Gaza, saying they are insensitive, incorrect, and fanning the flames of anti-Semitism.
The elected official who represents the highest concentration of Jews in the state does not seem to be standing up for, listening to, or representing them.
The letter pointed out on October 29th, Bush issued a statement on social media saying we can't be silent about Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign.
When we ourselves were the result of the largest ethnic cleansing in history, and the state that they live in was based on the need for a safe place to live, is not just triggering, it's also just patently untrue.
Cori Bush.
You may remember the riot a few weeks ago in Los Angeles outside the shul. This happened just this week in New York. What's going on is it's relatively common. Let's say it's not uncommon from time to time for real estate people in Israel to come to the United States and come to shuls and sort of realtors facilitating for American Jews who would like to buy houses and property in Eretz Israel. So, it's across the world and it's inconvenient. So they, if they, as our as our cousins would say, if we can't go to them, so the mountain comes to us. So they've been coming to shuls, mostly New York and Los Angeles, and big cities in Canada like Toronto. And it's always been a non-controversial thing, but this year, ever since October 7, it's another excuse and point for the anti-Semites to come out. And I made the argument long ago, and I've made it in writing, I've made it orally, that if Jews would just stand up, these anti-Semites never would get to the front door of the shul. And instead of Jews complaining that the police aren't, yes, you should work with the city, the mayor, and the cops, and organize for the cops to be there and for the cops to do their job. But if a lot of Jews would come out and stand up strong, I've made the argument that's going to be an even more effective way to get the cops to come out. Because history shows that the cops and law enforcement, as soon as Jews start to defend themselves, that's when they all come out. And if it's the only way to get them out, it's also the proudest way. Instead of doing like in the Middle Ages during the Crusades, asking good friends in the Christian community to protect us from the Crusaders, there were true good friends, but they couldn't do it. They just couldn't protect us. We have to protect ourselves. And what's interesting to see here is that in New York, maybe they learned from Los Angeles, maybe not, but they came out. And so the anti-Semites could not get past an important barrier to get near the shul they wanted to attack.
You're too high to fuck with me. Hey, nigga ass. Whoa, it's good. What up? Whoa, he punched.
See how different this looks from Los Angeles? All it takes is for Jews to come out.
Get all the rallies. You don't know me. You don't know me. You're selling land. Kids are fucking dying every day. And you ain't fucking fuck Gaza! Fuck Gaza! I'll be sorry. I'll be you fucking belly bullet. Fuck you. No bang. You don't have to. Yes. We're obviously very respectful. Yes. No. My question is you're not allowed to put hands on people. You drop flags. That's what they do. So we're going to live by rules.
All it takes is for Jews to come out. When Jews come out, the police come out. And between Jews and police, that takes care of it all. When Jews don't do that, but stay home and dial 911 and ask mayors like Karen Bass to protect them, forget about it.
Just watch them. Don't worry. I've been attacked. Donald Trump! Donald Trump!
Dr. Ruth Westheimer, a renowned icon known for her work as a sex therapist, has died. She was 96. Westheimer was well known for her radio show Sexually Speaking and pioneering open dialogue about once taboo subjects. She was the author of more than 40 books and went on to host her own television program. Westheimer was also an advocate for gay men during the height of the AIDS epidemic. She died on Friday at her home in New York City, surrounded by her family.
In 1947, the United Nations voted to divide the country into a Jewish state, an Arab state, and a small international zone. Good news? No. Immediately came the guerrilla wars between the Jews and the Arabs, and not just by soldiers, but civilians too. I was one of them. I wanted to help defend the Jewish people. I joined the Haganah, the Jewish underground army. I learned how to take machine guns apart and put them back together again with my eyes closed. I learned how to teach children arts and crafts by day and throw a hand grenade by night. This is where I learned to shoot. I am a very good sharpshooter. I was short and I was fast, so I was used as a messenger because there was less of me to shoot at. Nights, I stood on the roof with my rifle and watched over a barricade at the city's entrance, where Israeli soldiers stopped every car to check it. I had been on surveillance for only 3 weeks when I returned to the youth hostel where I was living. When I got to the door of my room, sirens sounded and we were told to run down the stairs to the basement. And on the way down, I thought I can do my homework. Who knows how long we'll be down there? I ran back up to the lobby. It was June 4th, 1948. My 20th birthday. The bomb shrapnel tore into the walls, the plaster fell from the ceiling, people screamed, the girl here on my right fell to the floor killed, and then a soldier, and then another girl, and there must have been a second explosion because I was thrown against the wall. And when I tried to sit up, my friend Hannah was trying to unlace my shoes, and I shouted, "Why are you doing that?" And then I looked. And I saw that my legs and feet were covered in blood. Hannah, do I have to die? The ambulance took me to the hospital. The bomb shrapnel was dug in all over my body. The biggest pieces in my neck. My legs and ankles were cut and bleeding, and the top of my right foot was blown off. My surgeon, Dr. Eli, said that I was lucky not to have lost both feet. He operated and they took me downstairs to a room that was once a cloister. Every cot was filled with wounded soldiers. Every bunk was full, but I was so small, I could fit in a bookshelf. So that's where they put me. Some of the soldiers were in bad shape. One lost both hands from a grenade. Another was blinded, but we all tried to help each other out so morale was high. Mine was highest, because I was the only woman in a room packed with men. I could have recuperated for years.
Executive officer of the Republican Jewish Coalition.
That was Dr. Ruth. Bet you didn't know that.
Coalition, Mr. Matt Brooks.
Hello, Milwaukee! Let me hear you cheer if you support Israel. Let me
As you can see, I actually got this off Israeli TV.
hear you cheer if you support Israel. Now, if someone tried that at the Democrats' convention, they'd be booed off the stage. But here, at the Republican convention, we proudly and loudly stand with Israel.
For the record, as I've said in the past, these classes do not endorse either party. If there are similar clips available at the Democrat convention, we'll play them. This is the same idea.
This election is a critical moment for the American Jewish community and for Israel. This is our chance to continue the incredible pro-Israel legacy of the most pro-Israel president in history, Donald J. Trump. President Trump, among his many accomplishments, many of which they said couldn't be done, but he did it. He moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. They said it couldn't be done, but he weakened the Iranian regime. They said it couldn't be done, but he delivered the historic Abraham Accords, bringing us closer to peace in the Middle East. With President Trump, we will repair and rebuild the U.S.-Israel relationship that has deteriorated after 4 disastrous years under President Biden. Now, today, 9 months after the historic Hamas attacks, shockingly, President Biden is still withholding critical arms that Israel needs to defend itself. Boo. America must stand with Israel and against the terrorists, especially Iran. We must stand with the Israeli people. Now, my message here today to the Jewish community is clear. There is only one pro-Israel party, and it's the Republican Party. And here at home, under Donald Trump, we will put a stop to the rising tide of anti-Semitism. President Trump will bring back law and order so that American Jews can once again wear a kippah and walk the streets without fear.
I hate to say it, I think that's the first time he wore a kippah in 30 years. Again, we're not making an endorsement. If there's some Jewish spokesman who speaks about Biden and stuff like that, we'll put that up too. We're covering the previous week's news around the world impacting Jews.
President Trump will stop the mobs on the college campuses so Jewish students feel safe when they go to class. The Jewish community is ready to help elect Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. The Jewish vote continues to increase for Republicans year after year, and I promise you 2024 will be no different. So let me ask all of you, who will best stand up to the Hamas sympathizers and the squad? Donald Trump! Who will best stand with Israel? Donald Trump! Who will make sure Jews feel safe and secure? Thank you, RNC, for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you, President Trump, for your commitment to elevating Jewish American voices.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bong.
My name is Shabbos Kestenbaum. I am a proud first-generation American. I am a proud Orthodox Jew. And as of 5 months ago, I am the proud plaintiff suing Harvard University for its failure to combat anti-Semitism. I came to Harvard to study religion, the foundation of Western civilization. What I found was not theology, but a contempt for it. My problem with Harvard is not its liberalism, but its illiberalism. Too often, students at Harvard are taught not how to think, but what to think. I found myself immersed in a culture that is anti-Western, that is anti-American, and that is anti-Semitic. After October 7th, the world finally saw what I and so many Jewish students across this country experienced almost every day. When I planted 1,200 Israeli and American flags on campus, they were all vandalized within 24 hours. I was harassed by my peers merely for being a Jew and have received countless death threats online. Students and professors have openly called for new Hamas-style attacks against the United States. And perhaps most damning, when Hamas terrorists butchered 45 American citizens on October 7th, when they took 12 Americans hostage, Harvard refused to immediately and unequivocally condemn this atrocity. My fellow Americans, the anti-Semitic bigotry, unfortunately, extends far beyond the universities. Although I once voted for Bernie Sanders, I now recognize that the far left has not only abandoned the Jewish people, but the American people. The Democratic Party, the party I registered to vote for the day I turned 18, has become ideologically poisoned. And it is this poison, it is this corruption that is infecting far too many young American students. Let's be clear. The far left's anti-Semitic extremism has no virtue, and the radicalism on our campuses and on our streets has no moral legitimacy. Sadly, the far left-wing tide of anti-Semitism is rising. But tonight we fight back. I am proud to support President Trump's policies to expel foreign students who violate our laws, harass our Jewish classmates, and desecrate our freedoms. Let's elect a president who will instill patriotism in our school once again. Let's elect a president who will confront terrorism and its supporters once again. Let's elect a president who recognizes that although Harvard and the Ivy Leagues have long abandoned the United States of America, the Jewish people never will, because Jewish values are American values, and American values are Jewish values. God bless the United States. God bless the land of Israel. God bless, protect, and return the American hostages in Gaza now.
Our son, Omer, is an American citizen. For 285 long days and nights, Hamas terrorists have been holding Omer in prison in tunnels underneath Gaza. Omer, which is a biblical name and means in Hebrew the first crop, is our firstborn. He was born in New York City 1 month after 9/11. 8 months pregnant, I walked across the Queensboro Bridge towards home that day. And here we are, 23 years later, and he's the victim of another vile terrorist attack. Let me tell you a little bit about my son. He's a connector. He's an extremely social person. He loves sports. In high school, he was captain of the soccer ball, volleyball, and basketball teams. He's a natural leader. And he cares deeply about others and about helping them grow. He turned 22 on October 14, 2023. And instead of celebrating with us and with his friends, he spent his birthday as a hostage of Hamas terrorists. Imagine, over 9 months, not knowing whether your son is alive, waking up every morning, praying that he too is still waking up every morning, that he is strong and is surviving. I recite Psalm 23 in his merit every single day. Gam ki elech begei tzal mavet, lo erara ki ata imadi. I walk through the shadow of the valley of the shadow of the death. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
Bring them home. 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 During the brutal October 7th attack on Israel, over 1,200 people were slaughtered. Of them, 45 were American citizens. Where is the outrage? Where is it? This was not merely an attack on Israel. This was and remains an attack on Americans. Omer is one of 8 American hostages and one of 120 hostages still left in Gaza. Citizens of 24 countries and 5 different religions, still held by Hamas, denied basic human needs, their lives threatened every day. President Trump called us personally right after the attack when Omer was taken captive. We know he stands with the American hostages. We need our beautiful son back. And we need your support. We need your support to end this crisis and bring all the hostages back home. Them home. Bring them home. Bring them home. Bring them home. Bring them home.
Omer, we love you. We won't stop fighting for you.
Say it with us. Bring them home. Bring them home. Bring them home. Thank you, everybody. God bless Israel and God bless America.
Ladies and gentlemen, former paratrooper, congressman, and New York's Lee Zeldin.
And the entire world, I tell you this, we want our hostages back, and they better be back before I assume office, or you will be paying a very big price. With our victory in November, the years of war, weakness, and chaos will be over. I don't have wars. I had no wars other than ISIS, which I defeated, but that was a war that was started. We had no wars. I could stop wars with a telephone call. I could stop wars with just a telephone call. If properly stated, it would never start. We will replenish our military and build an Iron Dome missile defense system to ensure that no enemy can strike our homeland.
And we now close today with Hatikva again. The Louder Foundation runs Jewish schools all around the world. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I've got to run quickly to an unveiling, but today I really wanted to punch back with some very important inspirational material as well. And thanks just so much for being here. Bye-bye, and have a wonderful week. Class on Tuesday, class on Thursday.